Can you give me a little bit of background on yourself, how you got to this point?
I'm from New Jersey. I'm from a suburb in New Jersey, and I guess I started caring about ideas and writing in a way that was extracurricular maybe when I was 17. And since then, I tried to sort of start my own blog talking about some of the issues I talk about today. And my views evolved over that period. I used to be pretty much on the left, perhaps on the far left, politically, especially on the topic of race.
Mm-hmm.
And I was coming into my own just at the time when Michael Brown was killed in Ferguson and Black Lives Matter was blowing up, and I was very moved by that. And I very much identified with that upsurge of enthusiasm around Black identity politics, and slowly I came away from those views and ended up seeing identity politics as problematic in many ways. And eventually I started writing a lot just on my own, not necessarily publishing. And eventually I submitted a piece to Quillette I think in April of this year, and started writing for them, and those pieces got widely circulated.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's how I found out about you.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So you said the first time you published with them was in 2017? Last year, you said?
No, it was actually this year.
Oh,
wow.
It
was what happened was, you remember Kanye West tweeted, "I love the way Candace Owens stinks."
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And when he did that was such a profound moment for me, for mainly because there's this huge socially enforced taboo in the Black community around politics and around political parties, right? You can disagree on a wide range of issues, but you can't say anything nice about a conservative or a Republican without being seen as playing for the wrong team racially, so to speak. And I have many issues with the way Candace Owens frames issues. I think Kanye subsequently said many ignorant things. But the reason at that moment moved me was because there is this huge taboo around free thinking politically in the Black community in a way that there isn't necessarily in other racial groups. And I felt that someone with Kanye's platform is uniquely placed to shatter that taboo, despite the disagreements I might have with him or Candace. So I was inspired at that moment to write something about this, because it's so rare that you see something like this happen, a prominent Black celebrity endorsing a right-wing pundit. So yeah, that's really what got me writing.
What was it that you said that you changed? You used to have a very left mindset, mm-hmm. and then it changed. Mm-hmm. When did that change, and how?
It's hard to pinpoint any specific moment, but I do remember when Michael Brown was killed in Ferguson. I remember talking about this and just taking for granted that this was obviously an instance of police brutality, and that it was symptomatic of the fact that America's criminal justice system is rigged against Black people, and that this is just of a piece with America's brutal history of racial terror. I remember just taking for granted that that was true, and that this was further evidence of that. And I think I mentioned, maybe I had some conversations eventually with people who disagreed. And it was so shocking because I had never talked, I think I met one Republican in my entire upbringing, right? I'm from a very liberal bubble.
Mm-hmm. Any race, just one?
Of any race.
Wow.
Yes, it was a 5th grade teacher. But that should give you a sense of the degree to which I and many people who grew up in similar contexts were ideologically isolated only hearing a very narrow range of perspectives. So to actually disagree with someone on a topic like police violence, this is probably when I'm 18, and to notice that the person I'm disagreeing with isn't evil and isn't racist, because I know this person, for example. That helped shift things for me, because I just realized I had never heard the other side presented charitably. The only version of the other side I had heard was probably the occasional 30-second Fox News clip where someone who was really a hack in many ways, giving the weakest possible argument from the other side. So in my mind, up till that point, that was the whole other side. It was just Sean Hannity in his worst moments. So part of it is just meeting people who disagree and talking to them. Part of it is hearing the arguments against my positions by listening to podcasts and reading books. I do remember another moment that was formative for me was this guy John McWhorter, who I've since come to know, but who I didn't know who he was at the time. He's a writer, has written a lot on race issues, taking similar positions that I'm now taking. Who teaches at Columbia University, where I go. And I just went to the library and sort of on a whim took out the first book that they had by him, and it was called Authentically Black. And he was writing, the general thesis, it's a collection of essays, but the general thesis is that there is this social taboo in the Black community, this enforced conformity where you come under the shadow of being, quote, not Black enough if you dissent politically, if you suggest reasons for Blacks lagging behind on various indicators of success that aren't narrowly the fault of modern day white people. If you're willing to break that taboo, you're viewed as inauthentically Black, right? As selling out in some sense. This was the main theme of that book, and it was so obviously true when I read it, but I didn't realize that this was the type of thing that could be said in public, because I'd never heard a Black person say this. And but at the same time, it was so true it was obviously true once it was said. And I remember just that being an important moment too.
So how was it for you when you started to change your views? Because you say that you were in a bubble. I imagine, I mean, obviously you're public now, but before then, when you started to change, did you get any, flack for that from friends or family or anyone in your inner circle?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, these are. I mean, the irony is that many of the views I have can be expressed in private, but you get a unique amount of blowback for saying them publicly. This is another actually point that John McWhorter had made in that same book, which is that like there are all these poll results showing that the idea that systemic racism is a primary obstacle for Black people now is actually a minority viewpoint in the Black community.
Really?
Yes, there's one from Pew that found 60% of Black people without college degrees saying that race has played no factor. Race has not been a factor at all in their success or failure in life. There's another one by Gallup that found 60% of Black people saying bias is not an issue in housing, jobs, and other avenues of life. There's this Harvard sociologist, Ethan Foss, who's done extensive polling of the Black community and found that the idea that that the system is stacked against Black people is shared by maybe 30% at most of the Black underclass. We're talking about people who don't have jobs, aren't in school. The majority of them think the system is basically fair when polled. So one of John McWhorter's points is that just at the average barbecue of a Black family, the kinds of takes that I have are not anathema, right? But there's this idea that you can't articulate this where white people are around to hear, because the well-being of Black people in America is so dependent on white people feeling guilty and feeling on the hook. I think that was the second part of his thesis in that book, and I think it is true. So yeah, I mean, yeah, I've gotten significant blowback from some people talking to even privately. I've gotten into some very nasty and very, very bitter conversations. But in general, I find face-to-face conversations tend to go better than they go online.
Isn't that funny?
Yeah.
I do want to talk to you more about that, especially regarding the media. But while we're talking about kind of this experience that you're going through, how has it been now that you have been more public? That now that your pieces on Quillette have been kind of blowing up, which is great. How's that been for you?
Well, the only way I've experienced it is through what I get online, which is a mixed bag. It's a lot of compliments and a lot of very, very angry comments as well. But in real life, I mean, in real life, I almost only get fans coming up to me, right? Because, I mean, when's the last time you went up to a writer that you really hate and said, "Hi, my name is," and I hate your guts, right? Because most socially normal human beings don't do that face to face. You have to be really antisocial to go up to someone you just meeting and tell them how much of.
Some people get that though. I mean, I
Yeah,
see some
no,
of
it
these
happens.
guys.
It
I
does
mean,
happen.
and they're, you know, I mean, they're I guess a little bit bigger, a little bit louder. You know, I think like Ben Shapiro,
Yeah,
whoever,
yeah.
like they for sure,
Yeah.
get some flack. So.
Right. Yeah, I guess, yeah, Ben Shapiro's on a very different level
Yeah.
of being known than I am. And he has I think, a bit of a more combative
Yeah.
personality to begin with, so I can imagine that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But back what you were saying about kind of the perception that, the majority of the Black community thinks a certain way or feels a certain way, and you saying that that's not necessarily true. Why do you think it is? And, a lot of your pieces, you have so many statistics, facts. And from what I can tell, all of your sources are very public and mainstream. Why do you think more mainstream journalists aren't having the same findings or reporting the same things?
Well, I think a number of reasons. I guess the consequences for someone to point out these things, no matter how mainstream these poll results are, no matter how easy they are to find on the internet, the fact that I guess it's just you come under the shadow, like I said, of being a sellout. Yeah, I don't know exactly why that is the case, but it's something that just perpetuates itself at this point. What happens is that Black intellectuals who do more or less believe that systemic racism is a primary obstacle to upward mobility for Black people have a much easier time getting published in mainstream, respected, prestigious outlets like the New York Times or the Atlantic. Well, the Atlantic is better with this and getting better with this, I think. But I mean, the truth is that Quillette, where I publish, is not viewed as prestigious as these big gatekeepers like the New York Times, and especially not among liberal elites who have a disproportionate share of the cultural power. So I think we're all on some level prestige-seeking animals. This is is a point about evolutionary psychology, and where there's more prestige to be gained, people will be psychologically incentivized to go there and disincentivized from going where there's prestige to be lost. So I'm publishing for Quillette and pointing out the kind of making the kind of arguments I make. I might get attacked as a hack, or or a charlatan, but you're less likely to get attacked on a big platform as being a charlatan if you're publishing in the New York Times and publishing about how systemic racism is the biggest problem facing Black people, even if that's a position that's hard to justify with the evidence.
Why is it that these publications that have more prestige are more likely to publish one view over another?
Well, I think Shelby Steele, who is a really great black writer who's been writing about these topics for decades. I think he basically put his finger on why this is. He has two books, one called White Guilt and Shame, another called Shame, both of which are great. And he argues that basically what happened in the 1960s is that America, mainstream white America, finally recognized and admitted to its wrongdoing. It admitted to the fact that separate but equal was a lie. It was a false promise, that the system was really and had been for the centuries since slavery rigged against black people, and that no significant efforts had been made to remedy this. This was what the civil rights movement was. It was a absolutely winning moral movement that forced America to own up to its sins, essentially. And basically what happened at this moment was, obviously that was necessary, but it had this long-term, probably unforeseeable at the time, effect of delegitimizing mainstream institutions in America. And the best analogy I can think to give is not analogy Shelby Steele gives, but it's sort of like a moment where, as an adolescent, you realize that one or both of your parents is a deeply flawed person, right? Because up till now, you're thinking of them as a moral authority. You just have this naive view of your mom or dad as someone who deserves to be respected, even when you disagree with them. So when they tell you to get home at 11 p.m., you begrudgingly do it. And then you realize that your dad has been, I don't know, evading taxes or cheating on his wife, whatever. You realize that he has no moral authority to tell you what to do. And now you feel like you don't have to listen to him, right? That is roughly the analogy I'm giving here, or roughly the picture Shelby Steele paints, is that starting in the 60s, after the civil rights movement, any American institution, whether it's government, whether it's Ivy League colleges, the police, all the moral legitimacy that they were assumed to have was wiped out, as long as they were considered racist. It was now the onus is on any institution to prove a negative, to prove that it is not racist. So you see this all over our society now, where an institution has to prove positively how much it is doing to combat racism within the institution before you have to prove that it's racist to begin with. And it's a problem of moral capital, which is just like how much moral legitimacy is an institution viewed as having. And now it's the case that if you're not doing a lot to combat racism, you're just viewed as a morally bankrupt institution, and people don't have to listen to you. And I think that more or less explains why you see so many mainstream outlets promoting certain voices and not others.
That makes me think of, I feel like this is starting to spread into even like the market a little bit. I feel like you see a lot of companies now coming out against not necessarily the issue of race, but a lot of other issues, when it's kind of like, okay, I mean, like, you didn't have to do that, but great. Like, good to know that you're for this or that. Great, and I think some people have thoughts on if that's an advertising, PR thing, or if it's genuine or whatnot. But now it's getting to the point where I see some consumers get upset if a certain company or whatnot doesn't come out with a specific voice or message if something happens. But
yeah, no, I think the biggest example of this recently is obviously Colin Kaepernick and Nike. I think that like that example for me, it signals that it is profitable for a massive company like Nike to take the basically far left position on police violence. The idea that there's an open season on black men in this country, which is not at all justified by the evidence. But it's profitable for Nike, or at the very least, they break even by endorsing that, which shows to me how widespread those beliefs are, or how how mainstreamed once radical views now are. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and it's funny. It's because it's all very new. Like that just happened a couple weeks ago. I think a lot of people just kind of, it's happening. We'll see where it goes. This is why I think like your perspective and hearing different perspectives on this issue is so interesting, because you, from what I can tell, you do seem to be pretty fact and statistic based. So I'm looking forward to jumping into that.
Sorry, the other interesting thing about the Nike case is that Nike, it's the kind of corporation, something like, I've seen a statistic, like something like 2% of its revenue goes to its assembly line workers. This is the kind of institution that you would expect to get heavily criticized from an anti-business perspective, from an anti-free market perspective, anti-worker exploitation perspective. Classic far left economic perspectives. This is the kind of evil global capitalist organization that the far left is supposed to hate. And yet they judge it to be in their profit to agree with the far left on police violence, which I think that's an irony. That there's some irony there.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for watching the episode. If you're interested in contributing to the conversation and supporting the show, there's 2 easy things you can do. 1, click subscribe, and 2, visit our Patreon page where you get exclusive access to the Exploring Minds community.